best viewing experience this evening, we encourage you to put your screen on speaker view. On an iPad, that is in the upper left corner. I'm not sure where it is on an iPhone, and I believe it's in the it's along the top on the right on a computer. I'm Rochelle Weiss-Crane, and I am lucky enough to be the producer of this amazing film festival. We're really excited to be able to bring this to you on a virtual platform this year. It was quite a pivot for us, but we think it's been going well. And welcome to our second talk back on the movie Flawless. I want to thank all of our sponsors and community partners for helping us to put this festival on for the community. And in particular, I want to thank Congregation Sheriff Israel, the Legacy Senior Communities, and the Women of Adat Havarim for supporting this particular film, Flawless. And now we have a special treat. Joe Goyne, who is the president of Pegasus Bank and presenting sponsor of our film festival, is with us this evening. And he's got a few words, and he might have something about a toaster to tell everybody, but welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Rochelle. Well, welcome to everyone. And I just want to say on behalf of Pegasus Bank, it is a real privilege to participate and be the title sponsor or presenting sponsor. And I think this is a third or fourth year, and it's just been a wonderful experience. I want to thank everyone, but especially Rochelle and Adina Weinberg, and Brenda Marcus is wonderful, and Joel Schweitzer at the AJC. It's just been a great collaborative effort, and it's just been a wonderful experience. You know, in the past, we have had a drawing for bagels from H&H Bagels in New York, as well as a toaster, and it's been a big hit, and a lot of people have gotten excited about it, and a lot of people have enjoyed the bagels and the bagel toaster. And I was asking Rochelle, we need to think of some way to do this in a virtual manner. I still have some toasters left, and the bagels are great. So if anybody comes up with ideas of how we can do this in a virtual manner, we're open, and we're certainly willing to do it. So, you know, we look forward to the rest of the festival, and I hope you will enjoy the evening tonight and the rest of the festival. And at this point, I will turn it over to Brenda.
Thanks so much, Joe. It's my great honor and privilege to welcome Rabbi Roffman to our forum tonight. He has always been a great supporter of our festival, very enthusiastic supporter, and we thank him for that. We always like to ask him to talk on movies that have a delicate or controversial theme, and because he always manages to steer us in the right direction. So thank you so much, Rabbi Roffman. I want to tell you all that unfortunately there was a power outage in his neighborhood, and so he's talking on his cell phone. He's hoping he'll have enough battery, but he's got his wipes there in case he doesn't. So if you see a sudden break or hear a sudden break, don't go away, because he's just swapping phones. Thank you. So now, Rabbi Roffman, it's over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brenda and Rochelle. It's wonderful to be back. I think this is my 5th or 6th year doing the film festival, so it's always a very special treat for me, a little bit of a distraction before the busyness of the high holidays. So before I begin, you know, because the format is a little bit different this year, you know, usually I kind of plant a seed in the audience's mind before we start the film. And I unfortunately didn't have the opportunity to do that. But every year I ask the same question whenever we watch a movie. Now, I kind of explain that my personal background is that before I became a rabbi, I worked as an actor in musical theater in New York, and I'm very fond of film and theater and the arts. and learn to see things, learn to see plays and movies from a certain perspective, which is that movies like theater, they have plots. There's a relatively clear, extraordinarily clear story in this very, very interesting movie. And I could relate the plot back to you just as I'm sure all of you could to me. But what I am most interested in when I watch a movie is, what is this movie about? What are the themes, the ideas that are being explored in the film? And what signals do we get from the director and from the actors about what it is that they want us to think about? So I'm going to start us off by, hopefully this will work, taking a little bit of a chance, which is to ask you to, if you can please, write just a couple of words in the chat. What is this movie about? Again, don't say, well, this is about a transgender young teenager named Eden and her struggle to find her place in this high school. What are the ideas that keep coming back in the movie over and over and over again? The things that the filmmakers, the issues that the filmmakers really want you to think about. So I'll give you about 20 seconds or so to write something in the chat. Great. Good. Yeah.
Rabbi Roffman, you're able to see all these?
Yes, I am. I'm looking at all of these come in, and they're all right on the money.
Great. Okay.
So terrific. So I see a lot of things here. One of the things that I see several times is the word acceptance, which of course is where the movie, in a sense, ends up. That Aiden ends up with a kind of acceptance from her certain members of her family, her father, certainly more than at the beginning of the movie, and also this small group of this trio of friends that she's managed to make at the high school. I see a couple of things in here about how cruel and how difficult it can be to be a student in high school, no matter what your particular differences are. Right? It's obvious what the differences are for the student that's the main character in this film. And that is connected to, all of these issues are really connected to self-awareness, this journey of self-discovery that we take, particularly in these years of our lives. So I'm definitely seeing a lot of things here that I'm going to want to talk about, and then hopefully there'll be time at the end for some questions. It's interesting that the Hebrew title of this movie is not Flawless, but it's actually The Prom. But I think in many ways, Flawless is a perfect title for this movie. I'm interested to see how, I don't know the answer of how it is that they came up with using this particular English word, because it actually reminds me of this genre of film. Many of you probably are not as familiar as I am, and I'm not that familiar with the typical high school teenage dramedy. And I'm thinking about Clueless or Saved, or movies that have come out in the last couple of years. Booksmart is another. All of them are really interesting, funny, challenging, and sad at times. Movies about how difficult it is to be a student in high school. But this idea that what it is that these teenagers are looking for is a certain kind of perception of themselves. And that perception is reflected so beautifully in the word flawless. The opening image of this movie is really extraordinary, right? We're taken right into this high school, and the first thing that we see is this pristine white wall and the blue blockers on the side, and in walks on a horse a young man who we learn in just a couple of minutes is going to enter into this perfectly organized gym and ask one of the girls that's in the gym for a date to the prom. Appearances here are really at a premium, and it certainly is exaggerated. I dare all of you to go out and find a high school anywhere in the world that is as clean and pristine as the high school that was portrayed in the movie. But right away, you get a signal from the filmmaker, that what we're talking about is perception and the aspiration to be perceived in a kind of perfect way. All of the kids at the high school, and of course, we'll certainly get to the main story in a second, their lives are revolving and sort of counting on the idea of them presenting themselves physically in the most attractive way possible so that they could achieve their goal, which is to have one of these incredibly sweet fairy tale kind of moments where they have somebody come and ask them to the prom. You know, one of the things that we learn later on in the movie is that I'm sorry, hold on one second.
The power's back on. So
I saw that. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just going to keep going for now. So the power just went back on in my house. So I think it'd be too tough for me to switch back and forth now, but I may in a second. So, you know, what they're all hoping for is this fairy tale moment where they'll be able to be seen by their peers in this, you know, really, perfect way. One of the moments in the movie that I absolutely loved was the moment where these two twin teenage boys end up asking these two girls out to the prom. And what you see, you know, they start, you know, the music swells, and I can't remember, I think there was balloons in that scene. And one of the girls says, "Is this the one you wanted?" And the other one says, "No, do you mind if we switch?" Right? And the two couples kind of switch. It doesn't really matter who the person is that helps them to be in this position where they're perceived in this way. There certainly isn't a deep emotional connection here, but rather what they are just concerned about finding themselves into their fairy tale. And of course, we also get a hint very early on in the movie. You know, some of you may have known what's coming, and certainly this was advertised as a movie that was about a transgender teen. But we get a sense early in the movie that instead of being on drugs, you know, God forbid, in this high school in Jerusalem, what they're all passing around to each other is the business card of the plastic surgeon in town, because they are willing to alter their bodies in a pretty significant way in order for them to be perceived as flawless. And that's where, you know, Eden coming into the picture here is quite a genius move. Because this movie really is at its heart about two things. One, it's about the story of this transgender teen and that her journey towards self-acceptance and acceptance by others. But of course, it's also about how teenage girls in particular are perceived, how they're gazed at by others based on their physical appearance, and what it is that they're willing to do in order to make that happen. So enter Eden, right, who's carrying around this secret, of course, that she is transgender, and clearly, she does not want anybody to find out. You find out later in the movie, but she's carrying around this secret with her through most of the movie, aware of the fact that everyone around her, particularly the girls, and there are, of course, these typical scenes in the bathroom where the teenage girls are making themselves up in the mirror, are obsessed with their own appearance, and they're looking to alter their body in a certain way to make themselves more acceptable on a superficial level to the members of the opposite sex. Again, another moment in the movie that I absolutely loved was after Tigist had her operation and she received a breast enlargement. Her boyfriend dumps her, right? He is not after the physical, this kind of superficial layer of appearance. He cares much more about who she is. But for these girls, they're willing to do anything. And Eden's journey is kind of again, a sort of a reflection of that. She is not interested primarily in her outward physical appearance, but rather on having her body reflect who she truly is inside, what her identity is. Hopefully you noticed, of course, that Eden is the one who carries the story, and you thought a little bit about her name, which is a fascinating element of this. Eden, of course, is the Hebrew word for Eden, a word that we all know very well. And Eden is the place where the world began. And what was true about the Garden of Eden? It was perfect. It was flawless, right? And yet here is this character who is, deep-seated insecurity about herself because she knows that her gender identity does not match the physical body that she is living in, and has to go on this, go through this terrible ordeal in order to get herself to a place where she feels like she is getting what she needs in order to make, in order to continue this full transformation into a woman. So Eden is, right, her name evokes perfection, and yet she is a person who with tremendous internal struggle. One of the things that this made me think about, there's a very fascinating Midrash, and I'm sure that some of you will ask about kind of the Jewish element of this a little bit later. There's a very famous Midrash about the creation of Adam and Eve. There's a verse in the first chapter of Genesis that talks about God's creation of man and woman. Actually, not Adam and Eve, they're in the second chapter of Genesis. This is the first chapter of Genesis. And the Hebrew is Zachar unekeva bara otam, that God created them male and female. In other words, he created a male and he created a female. Almost 2,000 years ago, the rabbis in the Midrash read that verse differently. What they read was, the first person was created male and female. Let that sink in for a second. So this idea of the struggle to identify one's gender, or believing or knowing within oneself that there are disparate elements of both genders within you, is not a new idea in Judaism. And it's even implanted by the rabbis into the very fabric of the story of creation itself. Eden, of course, experiences a kind of expulsion by the same way that Adam and Eve did as well. What happened to Adam and Eve? They ate from the fruit of the tree of good and evil, and suddenly they realized that they were ashamed because they were naked. Eden's reveal happens paradoxically, tragically, in the same way. She is exposed to a tremendous amount of internal shame because the curtain is pulled away from her after she's had the operation, and the full extent of her physical body is revealed to others. And there's a break between her and these two girls who are trying to set up this little bubble of perfection among the three of them. If the rest of the school isn't going to accept them, fine, but at least they can create this little Gan Eden, this little Eden themselves amongst the three of them. And then she is kind of expelled from, or at least temporarily, as soon as that reveal happens. I love thinking about the way that this movie was shot, going back to the pristine image in the beginning of the high school, and compare that with the life that Eden is living in throughout the movie. On the one hand, she goes to this high school, which is sanitized and clean, and where everybody's looking for these kind of visions of perfection. But that's only half the movie. The other half of the movie takes place in her home with her father, who is having real trouble accepting her for who she is. There's that, think through what the scenes in these apartments look like. Now, having lived in Jerusalem for a couple of years, I can tell you that when these apartments, many of them were built, they were built in a hurry, and they were not built for comfort. They were built for utility. And after 60 or years or so, many of them look kind of run down. But the sort of the dichotomy between these two locations is really should be quite obvious to you when you're watching the movie. Here she is, right, in this high school where everybody is, where everything is clean, and yet she goes home to these incredibly depressing and dingy apartment that she shares with her father. In a sense, right, she's living in a place where everybody's trying to get to Gan Eden, trying to get to Eden, trying to be flawless, and yet she's stuck even in her own home in a place that is very much the opposite. I want to talk for just a couple of minutes, of course, about this very strange and terrible turn that the story takes when it's revealed that Eden's two friends have decided to follow the lead of this predator, this Israeli woman who has decided that she's going to prey on young children who are having body image issues and use that to get at their kidneys so that she can clearly sell them on some sort of black market. You know, this is a fascinating and troubling development in the story that fits, I think, again, perfectly into the themes that we're talking about, right? How is it that we find our true identity? And what is it that we're willing to do to our bodies in order to make that happen? One of the interesting questions that I think we all have as viewers when we're watching these scenes is, okay, it's clear that Eden knows that this woman, Karen, is not the angel she appears to be. And in fact, in many ways, speaking of heaven and hell, it seems like these girls are really making a deal with the devil in order to get what it is that they want, despite the fact that the devil is using language that's anything but, right? This is a mitzvah. This is something that you're doing, you know, to save the life of others. And don't get me wrong, while organ donation certainly is a mitzvah, and you know, and certainly in the Jewish circles that I travel in, encouraged, because preserving a life is the most important thing. The way in which this whole thing goes down is quite perverse. Now, these girls follow this woman's lead. It's unclear whether or not they actually know that what they're doing is either, number one, wrong or going to end up very badly. But in the end, what we're left with is this really fascinating comparison between the choice that these two girls, Keshet and Tigis, make to radically change their bodies for the sake of being flawless, and Eden, who has the same goal, but for a completely different reason. And this is a question that I'm going to leave you with, and I don't want to answer because I don't really think the filmmakers have an answer either. This is one of the things that I think they really want you to think about, which is, what is the difference between the choice that someone makes, like a choice of a Keshet or a Tigis, to alter their body to fit the vision of perfection that they have for themselves, that they ultimately want, versus what happens when someone who is born male makes the decision to also undergo a surgery which changes their body to reflect the reality, the perfection that they are trying to achieve. And I think one of the things that's, again, so ingenious about this movie is the way that it lines up two things which you would never think are you know, quite the same, in a way that even is a little bit challenging and uncomfortable. Because this question, certainly, you know, one of the reasons this movie was made is because the world has not come to a decision about what it means to accept people who are transgendered, both in terms of the idea of the idea of being transgender itself, and of course the reactions to people in our society who are transgendered. Clearly, the movie has a particular view here. You know, I think one of the nicest, sort of more nicely written and come together moments that come together so nicely in the movie is at the very end, towards the end, after this reveal of who Eden really is, and Keshet asked her this question: "How long have you known that you are actually a woman?" And Eden responds with a perfect retort, which is, "How long have you known that you are a woman?" Which is to say, it's clearly the view of the filmmakers that she was born a woman with the body parts of a man, and that her identity is really never in question or up for debate. It's really just a question of what it is that she needs to do in order to get herself to a place where she feels comfortable in her own skin. I want to end my remarks before we take a few questions, hopefully, with this idea of acceptance. Of course, you know, and this is, I think, one of the ideas that would be a little bit predictable, which is to say, we all know, watching this movie, that the kind of acceptance that each of these three main characters are going for in the, you know, at the beginning of the movie and in the development of the movie is not going to be satisfactory. Each of these women, these girls, change their bodies in significant ways and sort of expect, or at least two of them do, that they're going to end up not on the outside of the bathroom, but on the inside of the bathroom, if you know what I mean. That they're going to be in front of that mirror with all the other girls who have, you know, also many of them altered their bodies and are kind of on the in crowd. And yet, of course, what we see is that this change that they make in their own bodies does them very little good socially or emotionally. The question of what good it does Aiden is a different question, I think a much more complicated question. But what the three of them do come to an understanding of is that being an outsider sometimes means finding acceptance with those who are also outsiders, rather than seeking to make certain changes in how it is that we believe or how it is that we are perceived for the sake of being inside. You know, the cliche way of putting this is that, of course, what it is to be flawless has nothing to do with your appearance, but rather the sharing of the truest parts of yourself in an authentic way, and a sharing in a way that creates a real bond, as opposed to a bond that is entirely based on superficiality, right? It could be you I'm kissing, it could be somebody else I'm kissing. As long as we're kissing and there are balloons around us and, you know, romantic music playing in the background, it doesn't matter, right? That's clearly what it is that this movie is rejecting in favor of a search for self-acceptance and a search for awareness of others who are going to accept you on your own terms, as opposed to the terms that others put on you. I'll say just one last thing, which is that, it is quite bizarre. And I actually had the opportunity to speak with an Israeli friend of mine the other day about this movie. And I mentioned to him, he lives in Jerusalem, he lives in Yerushalayim. And I said, have you seen this movie, Flawless, or, they call it there, the Prom? And he said, no. And I said, it's really bizarre. Here's this whole movie that takes place in Jerusalem. And at least to my recollection, unfortunately, I didn't get to watch the movie as many times as I would like. There is not one kippah in this entire movie. That what we're looking at in a city which is primarily made up of religious Jews, along the spectrum of observance. That religion, in a sense, really almost has nothing to do with this movie. The fact that it takes place in Israel is kind of happenstance. In a sense, we get the sense that this movie very easily could have taken place in another European country or in America, and that there isn't anything particularly Israeli about it, other than the very much Israeli personalities that we come to learn, that we as American Jews particularly have come to know and love. And the question of, what is Israeli about this movie? What does Judaism have to say about this movie is kind of left unanswered. And one of the questions that I have in watching it is, was that intentional? Did the filmmakers decide to make a movie which has deeply religious questions in a religious city and not address them at all, to make some sort of point about whether or not religion or Judaism should have something to say about the issues that are discussed in the movie? So I'll leave you with that as well.
Okay, so thank you so much, Rabbi Roffman. That was fabulous as usual. You did not disappoint. And I'm going to ask everyone to put questions in the chat, and I'll start us off with a couple that we received in advance. So
Great.
The first question is, in English, the name Eden can be for a male or a female. Is that true in Israel for Aiden? And is it? Yeah. And do you think that was intentional?
Oh, absolutely. I think it was intentional. And I go back to that Midrash that I quoted, where the first human being was both male and female, that there is a kind of ambiguity. One of the ideas that I love, I'm actually a little bit of a mystic at heart, is that at the beginning of creation, the beginning of the world, and this is really digging deep here, what existed was God, right? God withdraws from the world and leaves behind little sparks, right? And that's us. But at the beginning, we were all one, male, female, white, black. I mean, there's certainly race issues in this movie as well. I don't mean to ignore them. But Eden was a place of kind of total unity, where all things existed in a symbiotic relationship, and the division between races and genders didn't exist quite in the same way at the original moment, right? Of course, as the Bible progresses, it's quite clear that there are differences between men and women, and Judaism takes a strong stance that there should be, which again is not something I'm going to spend a lot of time on now. But definitely, I think the ambiguity of that is certainly not unintentional.
Okay, and another question. Do you know if the filmmakers had researched and found that teens actually do go to the drastic step of selling a kidney in exchange for plastic surgery?
I don't. Though there is another, there is actually another movie about this, believe it or not. And I meant to look it up before tonight, and I had forgotten. I don't know how many of you are film buffs and remember the movie Amélie, which is a beautiful French movie about this speaking of insecure, young French woman who goes on a journey of self-discovery. She makes another movie a couple years later. So go Google her on IMDb. Her name is Audrey Tautou, which is also about the harvesting of organs in this very illicit way. Whether or not girls are actually doing this, I don't know. I dare say we hear enough about these kind of awful things in the world, and I would not be surprised if they do exist. And I did see somebody in the chat. Thank you, my good friend Julie says that she read that the kidney deal was in fact based on a real news story. Right, so there you have it. Disturbing.
Okay, so I am not seeing any other questions in the chat. Does that mean nobody wants to type? And does somebody
I
raise their virtual hand?
Yeah, please do raise your hand or add something and I didn't mean to cut you off, Rochelle. I'm sorry. I did see one extra comment here. I don't think religion was the point in any way. Since it is an Israeli, i.e. set in Jerusalem, that is what we as American Jews sort of take it for granted that religion would be part of the theme. And again, I think that's one of the answers to the questions that I pose, which is kind of, fooled you, right? You might think that this movie is going to be about, the Jews who reject the idea of being transgender, and that the kind of the bullying that enters into this movie is going to be, really from a religious lens. And in fact, what we find out is that that's not true. You don't need religion in order for people to bully each other, right, on this particular topic. So, an excellent point, I think.
Okay. Does anybody want to either raise your hand like this, and I'll scroll through and try to find you, or raise your hand virtually to ask a live question? Marilyn Schaefer. Adina, can you unmute Marilyn? Can you unmute? There you go.
I got it. I unmuted. Okay, I want to ask a question.
Sure.
The rabbi said, you said that we should give our body parts, or it's okay to give the body parts. I remember when I was a little girl, an aunt or something lost a leg. They buried the leg, and then they buried her when she died many, many years ago. Left. Is that so? But a body part is not considered a limb?
So, yeah, I mean, the position on this, and anything in Judaism is there's not one answer, right? Of course, the idea that the body is a sacred container given to us by God that should not be altered is very much an idea that's still respected, widely observed in Jewish circles. Certainly to the extent that where people who are buried should be buried with all of the, everything that they were born with. On the other hand, in recent years, in response to the invention of organ donation, for sure the Reform movement, for sure the conservative movement, and definitely certain elements of the Orthodox movement have said, okay, friends, we have this thing called pikuach nefesh, of saving a life, which is greater than, which we, hold above many other mitzvot, and therefore it is a mitzvah, right, and it is allowed to give away your organs before burial, so that somebody else could live. But certainly, yeah, I mean, the other part of that idea is still very much in play.
So if there's a question here in the chat, what kind of Jewish support is there for families that go through this? So I'm assuming that Sherry is referring to transgender issues. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you could clarify that, that would be great. I'm not sure that I know the answer to that question, or how it differs from what it is that we see in the States. Yeah. So, I think it's important to point out that Israel, again, in this sort of question of the intersection of religion, gender, and sexuality, that a large, reminder is that Israel is actually, certainly in the Middle East, sort of remind all of ourselves, right, is a pretty progressive country when it comes to the acceptance of people who are gay, and a growing acceptance of people who are transgender. So my guess would be that's, yeah, I mean, of course there are those in certain religious circles who are halakhically, legally, ideologically opposed to supporting those who make the choice to be transgender, just as there are people who, on certain religious circles, oppose the idea of homosexuality, and there's conversion therapy and all those other things. But it would be hard for me to believe that there aren't organizations that are working on this problem, supporting those who are going through this in Israel, just as I know there are in America. And of course, that for those who want to be accepted, it's a very difficult road, and the stigma remains. And of course, it's an incredibly difficult life to lead.
Somebody else is saying, I was a kidney donor for my brother. It's interesting in today's world with the internet that they were that desperate that they chose to believe this woman. And it was not really realistic. Says something to the brain.
Yeah, I mean, again, I sort of mentioned this before. It is an open question of how much it is that these girls really knew. Were they walking into this, with kind of eyes wide open, or were they deluding themselves, or were they not aware of what it is that they could get themselves into? Or perhaps were they so obsessed with what it is that they wanted that they were not willing to see the truth about what was happening? And, dramatic irony is one of the things that filmmakers, playwrights, authors use, to great effect, where the audience knows something and the characters don't know something. I think, at the most plain sense level, that seemed to be what was going on. However, you could debate, right, whether or not these girls actually did know what was going on and didn't care because they were so desperate. I mean, one of the things that was done, I think, so particularly well, and Eden, of course, did know what was going on so well, is that, one of the things that I talk about a lot as a religious leader is every single person on this call is being brainwashed by the world around you. You are being taught by advertising and by television and media and now social media to have a certain image of your mind of what perfection looks like in terms of the human body. And it's a real illness. It's a virus that's taken hold across the entire, globe, right? And no one is immune from it. And now with social media, it is certainly even, more of a sickness, because these kids are not only using social media to prop up certain unrealistic, or unhealthy views of what perfection is, but when they don't meet that standard, they're using social media to bully each other, and to tear each other down, right, and kind of rub it in that they don't meet those standards.
So I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, but a couple more comments. Just, that she was a teenager and, she just felt so desperate and that her father was going to maybe come around when she was 30, and that was, too long to wait. And somebody else is putting in information about a clinic in Dallas, a children's medical center that is devoted to transgender. And that a lot of families have taken advantage of it, and I think they were surprised by how many. Are there any additional questions that people have? There's a virtual hand somewhere depending upon your device, you can raise it or you can hold up your hand and here's another question. Okay, 2 maybe. What do we know about the actor who played Eden?
Actually, my friend Julie, who asked a question earlier, mentioned that there's a great YouTube video out there, and I don't know, Julie, whether you still have it, in which there was an interview with this actor, who did an incredible job, playing this role. So I would encourage you, that'll serve you much better than anything that I could say. Look for the interview with Stav, with the actress who played, this role. I understand, she talks about herself, but also talks about the making of the film. So I would encourage you to do that.
Okay. Are there any additional questions?
Carrie Gold has her hand raised. Carrie, you're unmuted, so you could go ahead.
Thanks,
Yo,
Adina.
I will put my video on as well. I'm just amongst a pile of papers here, so I've kept myself on no video. I've got personal experience with the transgender community, and there is a group that's a closed group, but it's DFW Families of Transgender Children. And it's a great support system. And the reason I bring it up in this context is because of there's so many people that talk about the difficulties they have within their own families, usually Christian families that aren't accepting. I feel very comforted that the Jewish community seems to look at it more from a scientific background or a scientific standpoint, that while we know females are 2 X chromosomes and males are an X and Y chromosome, there's still a spectrum of gender identity, as there is a spectrum of gender or of sexual preference. And I'm just happy that we do things like this and we can have very positive conversations about it. So this is just more a comment of appreciation, I guess, than a question.
And I join that voice of appreciation. I'm grateful to be able to discuss the movie and to bring awareness to the topic and to continue to open up the conversation in our community.
Well, I want to say on behalf of the film festival that we try to take on issues that are not always comfortable, and to push the envelope and to help us all understand more about the human experience through a Jewish lens. So this is a great turnout for any talk back. And particularly for one which might be considered controversial by at least some. So thank you all for being here. If there are no more questions, we will, we'll call it an evening and say thank you so much to Rabbi Roffman for spending his time with us, and we're glad you got your power back in the interim.
Actually, just it went out just as soon as my wife ran in to say the power's back on. Do you want to switch the computer? I was like, no, it's okay. And then right away it went off. So
It's
all right.
Okay, well, we're hopeful.
No, but this is it is a reminder to us of the extraordinary effort that everyone is making in this very difficult time to remain connected as a community, no matter what, right? So I certainly I'm glad that it worked out, that our phones had battery left so that I could participate.
Okay, well, thank you. Have a good evening, everybody, and we hope to see all of you next week for our talk back on When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit. That movie will be screening starting 7 p.m. on Monday through 7 p.m. on Wednesday. And the trick is, if you're running short of time, be sure to turn on your, to get the movie started sometime well before 7 and pause it. And you should, you could come back to it a few hours later and still have it there to see. So that's a trick for some people who think that our 48-hour window can be short. So, thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Good night.